Good morning, good evening, friends. Welcome to my channel, Ek Kitab Se Ek Moti, which in English means a pearl or gem from one book. Today I'm going to read just a few lines, maybe one or two lines from a biography of one of the greatest men of the previous century. He was the one who coined this phrase, reverence for life. Now, he used to write in German and French, so I don't know what term he used in those languages, but in English, he has made this phrase famous: reverence for life. That is, respect and honor for all living creatures. That is, respecting life and not taking the life of any creature unnecessarily. So I'm talking about Dr. Albert Schweitzer, and he was a German and French polymath. So I'm just looking at Wikipedia to get an understanding of some of the other things he did. I mean, I know that he was a famous doctor of his time. I mean, not the usual doctor, but a doctor who had the benefit of humanity in his mind or in his thoughts. So, according to Wikipedia, he was a theologian, organist, that is, he used to play the piano, a musicologist, a writer, humanitarian, philosopher, and physician. So he had a lot of skills and talents. I think most of us have several skills. We are multi-talented, but it's just a question of identifying our talents and making use of them. That's what makes a difference to the world. That's how we extract the hidden potential that is within each of us. That is, we need to try to identify things that are already within us. I think everyone is multi-talented, so it's just a question of making use of them, or deciding to make use of them, and then to work hard in order to kind of refine that talent so that it becomes useful for humanity. So this great intellectual was once asked, what's the problem with modern man? And his response was very short but to the point. He said, modern man does not think. He simply does not think. So his idea was that most of us don't think for ourselves. We just accept things as they are, or whatever we read from books, we just accept them without questioning, and we don't have this spirit of inquiry in us. So that was his diagnosis of the modern problem. That is, human beings don't think. You might agree or disagree with him, that's another thing, but then that was his assessment of humanity. So let me tell you about the book that I'm going to read from. So this is a classic library published by Wilco, and the title is Dr. Albert Schweitzer, Medical Missionary. The writers are Kurt Singer, Kurt Singer and Jane Sherrod, and it's complete and unabridged. Wilco brings up these books often. I mean, they have this classic library collection. So I remember I bought quite a few books in this series. So I had this Brothers Karamazov, written by the Russian writer Dostoevsky, and I had some other books of them as well. I think Anna Karenina, if I'm not wrong, and I have Pushing to the Front by Orison Swett Marden. I think it's Marden, M-A-R-D, and Orison Swett Marden was a great self-help writer of his time, and Pushing to the Front was considered one of the most famous books on self-help ever written, and it had a very positive influence on many people in the US and other countries. Anyhow, I'll talk about that book when I make a video on that. So let's start reading the passage that I've selected for today. And just one more thing about Albert Schweitzer. So, as I said, he was a polymath. So he mastered many different fields. So I think he had doctorates in several areas. I think in music, theology, philosophy, if I'm not mistaken. But you can Google his name and find more about his life. So here are the lines that I want to read. In the service of the spiritual and the true, Dr. Albert Schweitzer, at the age of 30, began a new phase of his training, the practical, rigorous training to become a medical doctor. 6 years as a student and 1 year as a hospital staff member lay ahead. So he had 7 years of theoretical and practical knowledge. I mean, he had to acquire theoretical knowledge of medicine and practical knowledge of medicine in order to become a physician. And this goal he set for himself at the age of 30. So he had a lot of determination to achieve what he wanted to achieve. So we'll talk about that in a moment. And then I'll choose one more paragraph. So I'm just skipping a few paragraphs. So now the fact was that he had to spend 7 years in acquiring a knowledge of medicine in order to become a doctor. So what attitude he had taken towards that difficult goal is what these lines are going to explain or unravel. To become one day the doctor whom these poor creatures needed. He's talking about African people. He was planning to set up a hospital in the jungles of Africa. To become one day the doctor whom these poor creatures needed, it was worthwhile, so I judged, to become a medical student. Whenever I was inclined to feel that the years I should have to sacrifice were too long, I reminded myself that Hamilcar and Hannibal had prepared for their march on Rome by their slow and tedious conquest of Spain. Let me read this last two lines again. Whenever I was inclined to feel that the years I should have to sacrifice were too long, I reminded myself that Hamilcar and Hannibal had prepared for their march on Rome by their slow and tedious conquest of Spain. So let's just discuss what we have read. So Albert Schweitzer was extremely successful. I mean, he was a very successful writer. That is, before he made this decision to become a doctor, he was successful in the field of philosophy, in the field of music. So he was doing extremely well. He was writing books, even in the field of theology. So he was a very learned man and an expert musician. So an extremely comfortable and easy career lay ahead of him. And he could have lived his life extremely comfortably. But then he had this feeling that it was his duty to go to the jungles of Africa to serve Africans, because at that time medical people in some parts of Africa had no access to modern medicine, access to the modern advances in medicine, medical devices, or medical other forms of medical services. They didn't have easy access to these things. So Albert Schweitzer decided to do it himself. So instead of letting a society do that, he decided to transform himself and become a doctor himself. So that was one thing. That is, he decided to serve people in Africa using his knowledge of medicine, the knowledge that he wished to acquire. That's one thing. The other thing is that the road was a long road that lay ahead of him. 6 years of theoretical knowledge he had to acquire and 1 year of practical knowledge. So that can kind of dishearten anyone and discourage anyone, even people who have great determination. When you think of 7 years of hard work lying ahead, that can discourage you, because yeah, we can visualize the goal and think of all the benefits that we'll receive at the end of that period. But then 7 years is an extremely long period, and very few people have the patience to wait. But Albert Schweitzer did wait, and what he did was he went back to history. So, as I said, he was a very well-read man. So he must have read about ancient history and the heroes of the past, not just fictional heroes, or heroes that we encounter in novels and stories, but real heroes of history. So he must have read about two great warriors of Carthage. So they were Carthaginians. I think that's how it's pronounced, Carthaginian, but let me just check it again so that we are correct in our pronunciation. So these two were warriors of Carthage. So they were Carthaginians. So these two warriors of Carthage, their names were Hannibal and Hamilcar. I think Hannibal was the father of Hamilcar, or was it the other way around? Let me just check. So we have these two guys, Hannibal and Hamilcar, Hamilcar and Hannibal. So let me just see who was the father and who was the son. I think Hamilcar was the father. Let's just check. So we have Hannibal, a warrior of Carthage, and I think his son was... So Hamilcar was the father and Hannibal was the son. So let me correct myself. So Hamilcar was the father and his son was Hannibal. So these two, Albert Schweitzer derived inspiration from the exploits or the great activities of these two. And let's just look at that quotation itself. So how did he acquire that inspiration? So he reminded himself that Hamilcar and Hannibal had prepared for their march on Rome by their slow and tedious conquest of Spain. So while they were preparing for their march on Rome, or attacking Rome, they had to first conquer Spain in a slow and tedious way. So he kind of had some parallels there, because even his way, was a slow way towards the attainment of his goal. I mean, he had to plod towards his goal instead of run or sprint towards his goal. So there was a lot of plodding to do, a lot of hard work, a lot of tedious and slow effort, gradual movement towards one's goal. So what we learn from this is that we should try to find some parallel in history, some kind of similar story that can inspire us, of people who achieved success in the past, who were in similar situations, not necessarily in the same field, but in some other field where we can find the parallel. For example, someone who is trying to do something that has never been done in the past, so they can derive inspiration from people who conquered Mount Everest. So the first person who conquered the Everest, right? Read about him, what his attitude was towards Mount Everest, something that was considered unconquerable or very difficult to conquer. So this is how we find parallels or analogy, right? So if you can also do that, most of the times you'll find a lot of inspiration. So for that, you need to read history, So I recommend Jawaharlal Nehru's Glimpses of World History. You can read that, or you can read the history written by H.G. Wells. And other than that, I think there is a huge tome of Arnold Toynbee. I plan to buy that, but then that's a long-term goal of mine to read that Arnold Toynbee's history. That's a huge book. Or you can read The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Gibbon. Even Winston Churchill has written several books on history. And you can also get inspiration from non-fiction, so which have some kind of history and imagination mixed up. So you can read about the exploits of the great Roman and Greek heroes. So the Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer, or other Roman works, for example. You have other great Roman writers whose works you can read. So you can also read biographies. So that's why Peter J. Daniels recommends the reading of biographies, because you learn how to overcome incredible odds. That's how you inspire yourself in times of discouragement, or when you feel down and you despair of ever achieving your goals. What you can do is you can get inspiration from biographies, from history, even from fiction, works of fiction that talk about these warriors and these heroes who achieved their goals despite incredible odds, despite a lot of opposition. So I remember Arnold Schwarzenegger's mentioning that when he was doing bodybuilding, he used to imagine the heroes of the past, Hercules, and Hercules had all these tasks, right? 12 tasks were assigned to him. I think that's why we call them Herculean tasks. One of the tasks was clearing the horse stable, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So he used to derive inspiration from heroes of the past. So we can just try to get some inspiration from these men or women who have succeeded in life, by reminding themselves of the historical heroes and how they overcame problems and how they achieved their goals. So that's it for today, friends. Let me just recapitulate. So Albert Schweitzer decided to become a physician at the age of 30. He had a long road ahead, 6 years of practical, 6 years of theoretical knowledge he had to acquire. I mean, he had to spend 6 years in acquiring theoretical knowledge of medicine, and then 1 year as a hospital staff, practical knowledge. So in times of discouragement or despair, he used to remind himself of the exploits of Hannibal and Hamilcar, and how through their slow and tedious conquest of Spain, they planned to march on Rome. Thanks for watching this video.